In the sweltering heat of the African savanna, a 12-year-old boy named Kofi dashed through the tall grass, his small, nimble body slipping between the blades like a shadow. He had lived in this village all his life, but today, everything was different. The air was thick with a foreboding sense. The usual sounds of chirping birds and buzzing insects replaced by an eerie silence. Kofi had always known the dangers that lurked in the vast wilderness around him, but nothing could have prepared him for what was about to unfold. Kofi's heart raced as he sprinted, his breath ragged, his feet kicking up dirt with every frantic step. He had heard the stories. Stories passed down from the elders about the lions that ruled the land, the apex predators that would stop at nothing to hunt their prey. Yet, as he ran, the thought that one might be stalking him never crossed his mind. Not until now, the moment he had ventured too far from the village, looking for firewood. The world had shifted. He had crossed the invisible boundary that marked the safety of human habitation, where the land felt familiar and safe. Beyond that boundary, the savanna was wild, unpredictable, and unforgiving. Kofi had been taught from a young age to respect the wilderness. His grandmother often said, "The land can give you everything you need, but it will take from you just as easily." He had never fully understood her warning until today. Now, as the hairs on the back of his neck stood up, he realized that the line between life and death in the savanna was razor-thin. The bushes behind him rustled, an unsettling sound that made his pulse quicken. He dared not look back. He couldn't. The stories had warned him about the eyes of a predator, how once you caught their gaze, it was over. Kofi's eyes stayed fixed on the narrow path ahead, where the trees began to thin out, hoping the village was near. But the farther he ran, the more it seemed like the distance between him and safety only grew. He stumbled, his foot catching on a rock, sending him tumbling to the ground. His hand scraped against the rough earth as he caught himself, a sharp pain shooting up his arm. But there was no time to pause. The predator was close now. He could feel it in his bones. The sound of heavy breathing reached his ears, slow, deliberate, as if it was savoring every moment. Kofi's heart skipped a beat, and he knew, with chilling certainty, that the lion was close. His mind raced for solutions, but the only one that came to him was to run faster. The trees were getting closer. If he could just make it to the forest, he would have a better chance of hiding. But the ground seemed to stretch further away with each step. His legs were beginning to feel like lead, his muscles aching from the exertion. A loud growl echoed through the air, a primal sound that sent a wave of terror crashing over Kofi. It was a lion, and it was right behind him. The air seemed to hum with the tension of the hunt. In that moment, Kofi's instincts kicked in, and he pushed his body harder than ever before, his mind focused on one goal, escape. But as he raced through the trees, a terrifying thought crept into his mind. What if the lion was toying with him? What if it had been watching him for longer than he realized, studying his every move? Kofi had no way of knowing, but the weight of that realization made him run even harder, the sound of his own heartbeat drowning out everything else. Suddenly, there was a sharp snap of branches behind him, followed by the unmistakable sound of powerful paws pounding the earth. Kofi dared a glance over his shoulder, his breath catching in his throat. The lion was right there, its golden eyes locked on his, its muscular body coiled, ready to pounce. Its mouth was open, revealing sharp teeth that glistened in the fading light. The lion was within striking distance. Panic surged through Kofi as he pushed himself harder, his legs now fueled by pure adrenaline. He could see the edge of the forest ahead. Just a little further, and he might make it. But his hope was fleeting. The lion was faster, its sleek body cutting through the grass with terrifying ease. Kofi could hear its growls, getting louder, more urgent, as if the animal knew it was closing in on its prey. As Kofi entered the clearing of the forest, he stumbled once more, this time unable to catch himself. His knees hit the ground hard, and his breath caught in his throat. The lion was mere feet away now. Its massive paws hit the earth, and the ground seemed to shake with each step. Kofi froze for a moment, his mind in chaos, his heart racing. There was nowhere to run. The trees offered no refuge, and the lion was too close. The tension in the air was palpable, as if time itself had slowed down. Kofi's mind screamed for him to move, to do something, but his body was paralyzed with fear. He could hear the lion's growls, the rhythmic sound of its breathing, as if it were savoring the moment. Kofi's vision blurred and his thoughts scattered. Was this the end? Would he become just another story, another tragedy for the village to tell? But as the lion closed in on him, something unexpected happened. The lion hesitated, its massive body pausing for a fraction of a second. Kofi dared to glance up, his eyes meeting the golden gaze of the predator. For a brief, surreal moment, Kofi saw something in the lion's eyes, a flicker of doubt. It was as if the beast was questioning its decision, unsure whether to strike or to turn away. The pause lasted only a moment, but it felt like an eternity. Kofi didn't have time to think. His legs moved of their own accord, driven by instinct and the sheer will to survive. But as he pushed himself up, ready to run once more, the twist of fate that would change everything took hold. Kofi's mind raced, but the roar of the lion was the only thing that seemed to exist in that moment. The world around him blurred as his breath came in short, ragged gasps. His heart pounded so loudly in his chest that he was sure the lion could hear it, too. But it wasn't just fear that gripped him. It was the weight of his life, his family, his community, everything he had ever known, that was hanging in the balance. Kofi had grown up in a small village at the edge of the Savanna, a place where the land was both a provider and a taker. His father, a man who had worked tirelessly as a herder of cattle, often told him that life was a delicate balance. The land gives us food, water, and shelter, his father had said, but it can also take those things away just as easily. The key is respect. Always respect the land and the animals that live on it. Kofi had learned those lessons well. Every morning, he would wake with the sun, helping his father tend to the cattle, guiding them to grazing spots, making sure they were safe from the predators lurking in the distance. His mother had taught him the softer lessons, how to respect nature's rhythms, how to care for their home, and how to be gentle, especially with the younger children in the village. And his grandmother, who had long been the village's storyteller, would regale him with tales of spirits and animals that lived beyond the human world. But Kofi had always been drawn to adventure. While his peers would play near the village, Kofi would wander farther out, seeking the untamed wild that stretched out like an endless canvas. His curiosity often led him into places that his elders warned him to avoid. He was young, and the dangers of the savannah were still an abstract concept, something to be feared in stories, but not fully realized in the heart of a boy eager to prove himself. Today, however, Kofi felt the gravity of those stories. He had always thought himself invincible, imagining that his youth and speed could protect him from anything the land might throw his way. But now, as the lion's eyes locked with his, he knew that the savannah wasn't a playground. It was a place where survival was a constant struggle, and the consequences of complacency were swift and unforgiving. As Kofi's legs trembled beneath him, the memories of his family flooded his thoughts. His father had been a proud man, stoic and strong, but also deeply affectionate in his own way. Kofi had always admired the way his father carried himself, a silent leader in the community. But more than anything, he remembered how his father had prepared him for this moment, teaching him to be strong, to endure, and above all, to never show weakness. But now, facing a predator, Kofi wasn't sure if he was strong enough. Would he live to see his father's face again? Would he ever make it back to the village? Then there was his mother. Kofi's mind drifted to her gentle face, her soft voice as she sang lullabies at night, calming his fears. He had always felt her love enveloping him, even when he ventured out on his own. What would she think if she knew he was out here, in the wild, so far from the safety of their home? He had been warned many times, but today, in the heat of the moment, it felt as though all those lessons about respect and caution had evaporated into the harsh reality of the savannah. And then there was Emma, Kofi's young sister. She was barely 5 years old, full of life and laughter. Kofi had promised her that he would always look out for her, that he would be the big brother she could rely on. He had been her protector since the day she was born. Emma had looked up to him with such admiration, and the thought that he might never see her again made his heart ache. He had been her hero, and now, in this moment, he wasn't sure if he was even brave enough to save himself, let alone her. The lion's growl broke through his thoughts, pulling Kofi back to the present. He could feel the predator's hot breath on the back of his neck, could hear the muscles in its massive legs tensing, preparing for the fatal lunge. The panic surged again, but in the midst of it, Kofi found a strange stillness within himself. His body, shaking with fear, felt the weight of his ancestors' legacy, the pride of his people, and the knowledge that he couldn't allow fear to dictate his fate. There was no time to waste on self-doubt. Kofi's thoughts began to sharpen, his mind clearing as the lion's growl became louder, more ominous. He remembered what his father had said. The land will test you, Kofi, and when it does, you must stand tall. Don't let fear cripple you. Your strength lies in your heart, not in your legs. Kofi's pulse quickened, not just from the chase, but from the sudden realization that his father's lessons were not about being faster, stronger, or smarter. They were about survival in its purest form. It was about staying grounded, about standing firm even when the odds were stacked against you. In that moment, Kofi understood that the lion, with its majestic and terrifying presence, was simply doing what it had been born to do. The lion wasn't evil. It wasn't trying to be cruel. It was only following the natural order of things. And Kofi, despite his fear, was a part of that order, a part of the circle of life that moved through the Savanna, through generations. His ancestors had faced these same predators, had fought and survived in ways that went beyond the physical. As the lion took another step closer, Kofi did something he had never done before. He faced it. He didn't run. He stood his ground, every muscle in his body tensed. And for the first time, he wasn't just a boy trying to escape death. He was a son of the Savanna, a descendant of hunters, a brother to his family. The lion stopped. Kofi's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't move. He remembered the stories his grandmother told him about the warriors who stood their ground against the beasts of the land, warriors who had never faltered, no matter how intimidating the enemy. Kofi wasn't just a boy in the Savanna anymore. He was a part of that legacy. Kofi's heart continued to race as the lion stared at him, its golden eyes gleaming with a hunger that sent a chill down his spine. The beast was so close now that he could hear its heavy breaths, feel the heat radiating from its body. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. It was just him and the lion, a primal standoff in the heart of the Savanna. The lion's massive paws shifted in the dirt, its claws digging into the earth, preparing for a final, deadly charge. But Kofi, despite his fear, remained motionless. His grandmother's voice echoed in his mind. Fear is a weapon, Kofi. Use it. Don't let it control you. He didn't know why he wasn't running. He should have been running. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to flee, to put as much distance as possible between himself and the predator. But he stood there, frozen. Perhaps it was a memory of his family, their faces, their love, that kept him rooted to the spot. Maybe it was a realization that this was his moment to prove himself, not just to the lion, but to the very land he had always taken for granted. The lion took another step forward, its muscles rippling beneath its tawny coat. Kofi could feel the vibrations of its movement in the earth beneath his feet. He swallowed hard, his throat dry, and his legs trembled, but he refused to break eye contact. It felt as if the lion was studying him, almost as if it was evaluating whether this boy, this human, was worthy of surviving this encounter. Time seemed to stretch out, and the world beyond the lion's gaze blurred. Kofi's mind was racing, trying to come up with any possible way to survive, but all his instincts told him was to stay still, to wait. But what was he waiting for? Was he hoping for a miracle? The lion's growl reverberated through Kofi's chest, a low rumble that sent a surge of adrenaline through his body. His muscles tensed as the beast took another step, its sharp teeth visible in the dimming light. There was no escape. There was no way out. Kofi's mind flashed to his family once more, his father, his mother, his sister. He had promised them he would return. He had promised to always protect them. Was this how it would end? Would he die here, alone and afraid, at the hands of a predator that only saw him as food? The lion lunged. Its powerful body exploded forward with terrifying speed, its jaws opening wide as it aimed for Kofi's throat. The sound of its movement was deafening, the air pushing against him as the predator closed in. Instinct kicked in. Kofi didn't think. He acted, in one fluid motion. Kofi dropped to the ground, rolling to his side as the lion's massive paws swiped at the air where he had been standing just a moment before. His heart pounded in his ears as he scrambled to his feet, feeling the dirt scrape against his hands. But there was no time to waste. The lion had missed its first strike, but it wasn't about to make that mistake again. Kofi's legs were burning with exhaustion, but he didn't stop. He sprinted forward, pushing his body past its limits. His mind was a blur of survival instinct. Just keep running, just keep moving. He couldn't afford to stop. The trees were close now, just within reach. If he could get there, he might be able to climb to safety. The lion would never follow him up the branches. But his hope was fleeting. The lion was gaining on him. Faster now, its growls turning into a primal roar. The ground beneath Kofi's feet seemed to tremble with each step the lion took. He could hear its breath, hot and heavy, growing closer, louder, until it was all he could focus on. There was no way he could outrun it. His mind raced for options. There had to be something, anything, that could help him. The trees. Yes, the trees. Kofi had learned how to climb as a child, but he wasn't sure if he could make it to the nearest branch in time. The lion was too close. He could feel the predator's hot breath on his back, could hear the crackling of leaves and branches as it closed the distance. Kofi's muscles screamed with exhaustion, but he pushed himself harder, faster. The nearest tree was only a few yards away, but it felt like a lifetime. The lion's roar echoed in his ears, its claws scratching at the dirt as it prepared to strike again. Kofi's body was screaming at him to stop, but he couldn't. There was no stopping now. With every ounce of strength left in him, Kofi leapt toward the tree, his hands reaching for the low-hanging branch. His fingers brushed the bark, and for a split second, it seemed like he would miss. But then, his hands locked around the rough surface, and he pulled himself up with all the strength he had left. His feet barely found purchase as he scrambled up the tree, his heart pounding in his chest. The lion was just a breath away when Kofi reached the first sturdy branch. He could feel the lion's eyes on him, its growls vibrating through the tree. For a moment, Kofi thought it might try to climb after him, but the lion hesitated, its massive body too large to follow him into the branches. Kofi perched on the tree, his body shaking with fear and exhaustion. His lungs burned, his muscles ached, but he had made it. He had escaped. For now. But the lion wasn't gone. It stood at the base of the tree, watching him with those cold, calculating eyes. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with the knowledge that Kofi had bought himself only a brief moment of respite. The lion's presence was a constant reminder of the danger that still lurked, waiting for Kofi to slip up, to make a mistake. Kofi's heart was still racing, but his mind began to clear. The fear had been replaced with determination. He had survived this long, and he wasn't going to let the lion or anything else take that away from him. He could feel the weight of his promise to his family, and in that moment, it burned hotter than anything the Savanna could throw at him. But the lion's gaze never left him. Kofi knew he couldn't stay in the tree forever. He needed to find a way to escape, to return to the safety of the village. He had already come too far to give up now. The tension in the air was unbearable, and Kofi knew deep down that whatever happened next would decide everything. Kofi's grip on the tree branch tightened as he tried to steady his breathing. His heart still hammered in his chest, the sound of it echoing in his ears. The lion was still below him, pacing back and forth, its eyes never leaving Kofi. It was waiting for him to make a move, to show weakness, to do something that would break the stalemate. But Kofi wasn't ready to give in, not yet. The tension in the air seemed to stretch on endlessly. The savanna silent, except for the occasional growl from the lion and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting the world in shades of gold and red. Kofi knew that the darkness would soon come, and with it, new dangers. The savanna at night was no place for a boy, and he could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in on him. As the minutes dragged by, Kofi's mind raced. His legs were growing stiff from clinging to the tree, and the exhaustion was beginning to take its toll. The lion, however, seemed unbothered by the passage of time. Its gaze was still fixed on Kofi, unwavering and patient. It was as if the lion knew that eventually Kofi would have to come down. It was only a matter of time. Kofi's mind flashed back to his family. He had promised them that he would return. He had promised to be strong, to never back down, and yet here he was, perched in a tree, a helpless boy being stalked by a deadly predator. He had never felt so small, so powerless. But he wasn't ready to give up. Not now. Not when everything was at stake. The thought of his father, his strong, stoic father, flashed through his mind. His father had always taught him that strength wasn't just about muscle. It was about willpower, about standing firm in the face of adversity. His father had never backed down from a challenge, no matter how overwhelming. And Kofi wasn't going to back down now. Not when he had come this far. A surge of determination filled Kofi's chest, pushing aside the fear that had been gnawing at him. He couldn't stay in the tree forever. He had to find a way to escape, to outsmart the lion. But how? The lion was too close, and his options were limited. If he jumped from the tree, the lion would be on him in an instant. But there had to be some way to use the environment to his advantage. Kofi's eyes scanned the savanna below. The lion was still pacing, its massive body rippling with each step, its golden eyes focused on him. Kofi's gaze shifted to the surrounding trees. The branches were too thin to support his weight if he tried to jump to another tree. There was no way to climb higher, and the ground was too far below for him to safely drop without the lion attacking. He was trapped. But then, something caught his eye. A large rock lay in the grass not far from the base of the tree. It was heavy, jagged, and just within reach. Kofi's mind began to race, and he realized he had one last chance, one last play. His eyes locked on the rock, and he silently cursed his hesitation. He had been so focused on escaping, so focused on running, that he had almost missed it. The rock was his key to survival. If he could make the lion think he was about to climb down, he might be able to distract it just long enough to use the rock to his advantage. It was a long shot, but it was the only option he had. Kofi shifted his weight, preparing to make his move. His hands were slick with sweat, his heart pounding in his chest. But he forced himself to stay calm. He had to be precise. If he made one wrong move, it would be over. He took a deep breath and began to slide his feet down the trunk of the tree, pretending to come down. The lion's eyes flickered, its attention momentarily distracted by his movement. Kofi's pulse quickened as he inched closer to the rock. It was now or never. With a final, deliberate motion, Kofi dropped from the tree, landing lightly on his feet. The lion reacted instantly, its muscles coiling as it launched toward him. Kofi's heart stopped for a moment, but he didn't look back. With all the speed he could muster, he grabbed the rock and swung it with every ounce of strength he had. The rock hit the lion square in the face, knocking it off balance for a split second. It let out a fierce roar of pain and confusion, its eyes wide with shock as it stumbled back. Kofi didn't wait for the lion to recover. He sprinted to the side, using the momentum to put more distance between them. His legs burned with the effort, but he refused to stop. For a moment, Kofi thought he might have succeeded. The lion was still disoriented, shaking its head as if trying to clear the impact. But then, as if fueled by a new wave of fury, it charged again. This time, however, Kofi was ready. He knew he couldn't outrun it, not in his condition. But he had one more trick up his sleeve. As the lion lunged, Kofi ducked to the side, narrowly avoiding the predator's sharp claws. In the same motion, he grabbed a long, sturdy branch from the ground and swung it at the lion. The branch connected with the lion's face with a sickening thud, and the beast staggered back once more. The lion growled in frustration, its eyes narrowing as it assessed its prey. Kofi, panting and exhausted, realized that this was it. This was his moment. The lion was now weakened. Its focus split between the attacks and its growing frustration. Kofi's survival instincts kicked in, and he used his remaining strength to make one last move. With a final swing of the branch, Kofi struck the lion in the side, pushing it back just enough to give him the space he needed. The lion, still stunned from the previous blows, staggered and let out a final roar before turning to retreat. It was no longer interested in the boy. The battle was over. Kofi stood there, breathing heavily, his body aching, his heart still racing. The lion had retreated, disappearing into the tall grass. But Kofi didn't dare to let his guard down. He knew better than to assume the danger had passed entirely. But for the moment, he had won. Kofi stood, panting, his body still trembling from the adrenaline that had surged through him moments before. The lion was gone now, retreating back into the vast savanna, its presence no longer a threat. But Kofi didn't feel relief. Instead, there was a deep, overwhelming quiet that filled the space where the battle had just unfolded. The quiet felt like a weight, pressing down on his shoulders, on his chest. He looked down at his hands, covered in dirt and scratches from his frantic scramble to escape. His palms were raw, his fingers sore from gripping the tree trunk and the branch. His legs ached from the sprint, his body aching from the tension that had held him captive in that moment. Yet despite the physical pain, there was something else, something deeper, that gnawed at him. He had survived, yes, but at what cost? Kofi's thoughts swirled, the enormity of what had just transpired sinking in. He hadn't just survived the lion's attack. He had been tested. The savanna, in all its beauty and terror, had shown him a side of the world he had never fully understood. There had been no room for heroism, no room for bravado. It was pure survival, instincts kicking in when everything else failed. And it was in that survival that Kofi had learned what true strength meant. For the first time in his life, Kofi understood what it meant to be vulnerable. His childhood had been filled with dreams of adventure, of proving himself to his family, to his community. He had imagined himself as brave, as capable. But now, looking back at the fear he had felt just moments before, he realized that true bravery wasn't the absence of fear. It was standing in the face of it, acknowledging it, and refusing to let it define you. The lion had shown him that. The raw power of the beast, the way it moved through the world with such ease, had terrified Kofi, but it had also taught him something vital. The world didn't care about bravery or fear. It simply was. It was up to him, and to all who lived within it, to navigate it with purpose, with respect, and with resilience. As Kofi sank to the ground, his body still trembling from the ordeal, he closed his eyes for a moment, allowing himself to breathe. The pain in his muscles was a reminder of the battle he had fought, but it was also a symbol of his survival. He had fought the lion, not with his strength, but with his mind, with his ability to adapt, to think on his feet. That was what had kept him alive. He thought about his family again, his father, who had taught him to be strong, his mother, whose love and gentleness had always been a comfort, and Emma, his little sister, who had looked up to him, who had trusted him. They had all depended on him, and now he understood the weight of that responsibility. It wasn't just about keeping them safe. It was about living up to the example they had set, about showing them that no matter how hard life got, no matter how impossible things seemed, there was always a way forward. But there was more to it than just surviving. Kofi realized that this experience had changed him in ways he couldn't yet fully comprehend. He had stepped into the world of the savanna as a boy, eager to prove himself, but he was leaving it as something else. Something older, wiser, more aware of the fragility of life. His thoughts drifted back to the lion. It hadn't been evil, not in the way Kofi had once imagined predators to be. It had been an animal, doing what it had to do to survive, to feed. There had been no malice in its eyes, no cruelty, just the primal need to hunt. The savannah didn't care who or what you were. It was a place where only the strongest survived. But Kofi had learned that survival wasn't always about strength. It was about resilience, adaptability, and the will to keep going no matter what. Kofi opened his eyes and looked out across the savannah, where the sky was now painted with the colors of twilight. The sun had almost set, casting long shadows across the grass, and the cool evening breeze swept over him, carrying with it the scent of the earth. It was beautiful in its own way, this wild land that had once seemed so intimidating. Now, it felt less like a battleground and more like a reminder of the power and the peace that could be found in accepting the world for what it was. He thought of his family again. His father's words echoed in his mind. The land gives us everything we need, but we must respect it, and it will teach us. Kofi understood now, more than ever, the depth of that truth. The land had taught him the most important lesson of all, that survival wasn't just about strength, but about understanding the world around you, about respecting it and adapting to its challenges. It wasn't about controlling the savannah or any of the dangers it held. It was about finding your place within it. Kofi stood slowly, his legs still weak, but his resolve stronger than it had ever been. He looked around at the vast expanse before him, and for the first time, he didn't feel fear. He didn't feel the need to prove himself. He felt connected to the land, to the animals that roamed it, and to the people he loved. With one final glance at the savannah, Kofi began the long walk back toward his village, the night falling around him like a blanket. He was exhausted, physically and emotionally drained, but he was also at peace. The lion had taught him the most valuable lesson of his life. That true strength came not from avoiding danger, but from facing it with courage, and from finding your way through the darkness. And as he walked, Kofi knew that he would never be the same boy who had first ventured into the savannah. He had survived, and in doing so, he had learned to live,